There we are then. Evening, Karen, Monica. Hey, Lorena. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Octavio, Mona, Lorena. Hey, everybody. Welcome along. Hey, good evening, Heather. And good evening, Laura. Hey, all. There should be sound by now. Comments are about 20 seconds behind. Good evening, Timothy. Good evening, Adam. Good evening. We still don't have sound? Okay. Hey, Todd. Welcome along. Making sure Miles makes his appearance here. Hey, Miles, don't play dead till you have to. There we are then. Hey, TJ and Wheaton. Trying to figure out how exactly do I position this thing. I go all the way over there. Or tighten it up to right about here. There we are. Hey, Don. Well, Laura, happy to help you to stay up for the ball game. Hey, Casey. Welcome, everybody, to the new Mysterious Chicago HQ. This is the official unveiling. Can anyone tell me if the title is correct? It should say Strange Tales of Rogers Park, but it's giving me Old City Cemetery. Hey, Monica. Happy birthday to Luca and to Christy. My nephew and my sister-in-law. This crazy shirt. Octopus. Hey, B. Hey, Chicago Harbor Lighthouse. Saying, oh, should not be saying Old City Cemetery. It's supposed to be updated. Restream is being weird tonight. It's also not telling me how many people are online, or even that I'm online, but clearly I am, since here you all are. Did I go bye-bye? What do you mean? This ain't the end of Muppet Babies. So sorry about the title. This is, in fact, Strange Tales of Rogers Park. Hey, Timothy. If you don't see a title, even better. Welcome along, everybody. Hey, Christine. Hey, Laura. Evening, Diane. Double dipping as you and your friend dug out for a cocktail and some live music. Enjoy yourselves. That sounds good. Places and steps of my new apartment where I can do that. Hey, Paula. Wisp, yes, I am drinking some Heaven's Door Rye tonight. It's a special occasion. It's a summer drink for me. It's like, it's the taste of like one of the sky on one of those hot brown Midwestern nights. Hey, Janine, hey, Casey. Alright, yeah, the title shouldn't be on the screen, but usually like up above your feed or something. Hey, Katie. Yo, Frank. Karen, that's fair. Where is the picnic? I might be back in town in time. Hey, Sue. Hey, Emily. Hey, Heather. Hey, Tom. Susan drinking bamboo rum. That sounds good. All the while, wherefore? Hey, Pat. Le Bar Woods. Where's that at? Oh, and you're Saguenash. Not too far. I'll see what's up. Hey, Michael. Yeah, if you have a title, it should be probably atop the video or somewhere in the file. Nothing I've put on the screen. Hey, Mom. Hey, Kristen. Bridget's having some wine. Hello, Chris. Miles. Look at this guy. Sneaking into the frame. Morning, Grandma Bell. Good evening, Wolfie. Hey, Sarah. Hey, Lisa.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of...
Hey, Joanne. Beer crawl through Fulton Market. All right. Parking situation there is absurd. Yeah, Old City Cemetery with Booze was last week. For some reason, it didn't update the titles. I've got them updated over here. And make sure to hydrate. They just asked if I would do a couple of boat tours on Sunday. Sure. When we're under extreme heat warning. I got my health to think of. Sue, happy birthday to your dad. Evening, Timberly. Hey, Norma. There's going to be a lot of time for me to just kind of hang around with the air conditioning on. Do I need ice trays? I think I still need ice trays. I keep thinking like, oh yeah, I don't have Band-Aids. Or, oh yeah, I don't have an oven mitt. Hey, Janice. Hey, Bella. We'll let Benny keep on going here for another song or so. In line for peaches for 30 minutes? There's supposed to be some peaches. The Catholic Mass heat stroke sounds like a bad one. We're going to let Benny Goodman do one more song, and then we will start properly. This is Benny live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. Just down that way. Several miles. Hey, Lori. Pat, fresh from Georgia at the Brat Stop parking lot. That's Georgia to Wisconsin. I could go for a Brat Stop run right about now. I saw the Gale Street Inn where I went with Patty Vasquez sometimes is closed. That's a huge loss. That place was incredible. I had this steak with horseradish glaze. And, oh, man. Bridget, I was never great with heat. Now in my 40s, that much less so. But it doesn't look like we'll have hit Michigan yet tomorrow, which is good, because that's where I'll be. I mean, Mars Cheese Castle is great and all. I got the t-shirt. But the real ones know about the Brat Stop. Thanks, Paula. It's been a very frenzied month or so putting this new place together. Karen, it is in fact Juneteenth, and we'll cover a little bit about that today. There is some connection here. Alright, Benny's finishing up this tune. It'll be time for us to start properly. Well, there's still a Gale Street in Mundelein, but that doesn't... No. No. Bunzel's Meat Market. That sounds good. I'll go to Milwaukee for that. Rebecca almost forgot the tour tonight. All right, this has been Benny Goodman coming to you live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago on a nice chilly January night in 1936, purveyor of assorted rhythms, all danceable, as it said. So, all right, everybody, that means it is time for us to start properly. Welcome, first of all, to the new Mysterious Chicago headquarters up here in Rogers Park. Yes, I have been spending the last month moving and setting up this apartment. Has been a lot of frenzied activity, possibly the most tumultuous month of my life, but I really love it here in Rogers Park. Now, Rogers Park, and in case you don't know, let me just pull up the map here. I put up a map. I forgot to add it to the deck. That'll just be a second. All right, so we got the loop. And all the way up north, not quite to Evanston, you come to Rogers Park, way up the red line, up to about the Loyola stop, the Morse stop, and the Jarvis stop. We've got four red line stops right here in Rogers Park. So all the way up on the north side, a neighborhood that has long been known for eccentrics. In 2022, the Chicago Reader had an article called Rogers Park, Only the Weird Survive. They called this place a haven for oddballs, the attic of Chicago, where the city stores people it can't get rid of. This is a neighborhood where the elementary school is named after a poet who was the first poet to use the word poop in a poem in its modern noun and verb sense. So welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for over 20 years now. Got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Murder Maps USA from Thames and Hudson, Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, Volume 2 is on the way, and coming this September from Arcadia, Chicago's Serial Husband, The Marriages and Murders of Johann Hawk. I really did want to call it Hawk Tales, woo-hoo, but, publishers never do what I want them to do. All right, so I am also the newest resident of Rogers Park, or within the most recent anyway. You are looking at the brand new Mysterious Chicago headquarters that I spent the last month putting together, and I already knew quite a number of stories about Rogers Park. I just lived over in West Rogers before, which isn't, so far away. But this really does feel like a whole different world where I am living right now. But there's lots of great stories here. I've been covering them for a long time, off and on, and there's fascinating people who grew up here, there's fascinating people who live here, and there are an awful lot of stories of murders and mayhem and magic and misers, too. We've even got a couple of stories about misers. So settle in, pour yourself a drink. We're going to talk a little bit about this new neighborhood of mine, Rogers Park. Well, to start with, it's a little bit late. This is one of the earlier residences. This is the residence of Patrick Toohey. Now, we got to go back a little bit further for the beginning of this. In 1816, the government bought this land from the Chippewa and Ottawa Indians. So, about 20 years after that, a guy by the name of Philip Rogers came in and bought it from the government at a price of something like $1.25 an acre. Now, his daughter married Patrick Toohey, as pictured here, who sold a big chunk of the land to a guy by the name of Stephen Lunt, who then sold other land to Mr. Greenleaf, Mr. Estes, Mr. Morse, and Mr. Farwell. You can see all of these names all around here up and down. Really, that's where Most streets are named after whoever bought the land first. In this case, you can actually find the newspaper article of Mr. Toohey selling the land to Mr. Lunt, who then sells it to Mr. Farwell, Mr. Morse. There was also a Mr. Jackson, but they renamed that one Estes because this place got absorbed into Chicago, and there already was a Jackson in Chicago. So more fool him. There's not a whole lot of data, not a whole lot of good anecdotes about what people like Stephen Lunt and what people like Patrick Toohey were really like. One of the wilder things, though, is that Patrick had a daughter by the name of Kitty Toohey. And when Kitty Toohey was about in her early 20s, she fell in love with a guy by the name of Dr. Micheli, Dr. Albert Micheli, who was a Belgian nobleman. But her father had him arrested before they could get married. There's some terrific quotes. This was a 3 or 4 day news story as Patrick Toohey did everything he could to try to break this couple up. And Kitty would say things like, "My father is always to blame for this. He has never approved of any of his daughter's lovers and dreamed of going up to some land where they don't reprimand their daughters." Eventually, she and Dr. Micheli went up to Wisconsin, but the priest there wouldn't marry them unless they had properly published the banns and everything like that precedes a Catholic wedding. So she pledged to be eternally faithful. But somewhere along the line, I think Dr. Micheli went back to Belgium as he kind of disappears from the record. And a few years later, Kitty scandalized the community again by marrying a guy named Edward Cullen. I could not find a picture of Edward Cullen, so I'll just post a picture of this particular Edward Cullen, the vampire from Twilight. Just a few years after the wedding, there was a 3 or 4 day story that Edward Cullen had disappeared. There was a rumor that he was in a downtown sanitarium, another rumor that he had telegraphed from Denver, but really nobody knew where he was or if he was alive or anything. The story went that he had been working in finance and drinking so much on the job that half the time he didn't know what he was doing. You do not want your finance guy to be drinking so much he doesn't know what he's doing. One story held that he went down to Dwight to take the Gold Cure, where they treated alcoholism as if it were a disease to be treated, not a personal weakness. Way ahead of its time. But the Gold Cure didn't work on him. They said he was only sober for a week after getting back and then right back to the habits. So this must have been resolved at some point. There were a lot of news stories about him being missing, nothing about him returning. But he apparently did return. He shows back up in vital records and continued living with Kitty for about the next 25 years until his relatively early death. I couldn't find a picture of Kitty. I couldn't find a picture of Edward Cullen. We'll just stick with this one. But, so that is some of the early history of Rogers Park. After the elevated trains were extended up this far, it went from being a neighborhood full of primarily single-family residences to a neighborhood primarily full of apartments. That was the case by the 1920s, which was the birthplace of one of the guys who lived just a couple of blocks from where I am now. I was almost going to use this initial picture as the intro, but people would think this was the building where I'm living. It's a couple of blocks away at 1256 Columbia. This is one of the boyhood homes of the artist Edward Gorey. Now, Edward was like 5 or 6 when they lived in this place. They lived at least 5 different addresses in Rogers Park when he was a kid. There is, you've probably seen his artwork before. Odds are that if you did not have a poster of the Gashly Crumb Tinies when you were in college, you knew somebody who did. A is for Amy, who fell down the stairs. B is for Basil, devoured by bears. You might have seen his work in the intro to the PBS Mystery series. Just this fantastically, instantly recognizable style. So he grew up around Chicago. There's a book of his that I had that said most of his fans believe he is British and dead. In fact, he has visited neither. Now, he lived around here and in a couple of the north suburbs, eventually moved up to the northeast, but he was a Rogers Park resident when he was a kid. As much formal training as he had as an artist, besides like a semester at the Art Institute, was probably learning at the elementary schools around here. But they seemed to move about once a year when he was a kid, and he always said that he hated it. But you certainly would recognize his art anywhere. I've always been a fan. But just a few blocks north of him, this is a story that's been occupying me for a bit. I've been talking to the state archives down in Springfield, but their paperwork on this guy is so voluminous that I'm going to have to go there myself to see it. But this is one of those murder stories where the building is actually still standing. At 6823 North Wayne was a story that really broke out in 1909. This is the house as it looked at the time. Almost exactly similar. They've redone the awning a bit. Read on the pillars. But not much has really changed. But this is a perfect example, really. This is Haldane Clemenson, who really does look kind of like an Edward Gorey character. Now, Haldane Clemenson was a young doctor whose wife's mysterious death occupied headlines for quite some time. Chicago Inter-Ocean even said the very name of Dr. Haldane Clemenson fits artistically into a deep, dark, romantic mystery. Few bestsellers in fiction have a more mystifying or thrilling first chapter. Now, the first chapter here was back here at 6823 North Wayne, which before they renumbered the streets, I think it was like 4088. Lived Haldane Clemenson with his children and his wife Nora Clemenson. Now, one night, Dr. Clemenson made a frenzied call to a neighbor and said, "My wife and I have been burgled. This place looks like a hurricane went through. Some burglars came in and chloroformed both of us. I'm awake now, but I'm afraid Nora is dead. Come over quick." So the person came over quick and found that Nora was dead, possibly of poison, but of apparent chloroform overdose. So the story that it was burglars doing it didn't seem to hold up. There were no signs of violence. There was no sign of a break-in. There were some footprints outside, but they matched Dr. Clemenson's shoes. So after some time, they took him into custody, and he said, "I'm only going to talk to one person. I will make a confession, but you have to bring Clifton Wooldridge." Now, Clifton Wooldridge was a member of the Chicago Police Force who wrote books such as Hands Up in the World of Crime and 20 Years a Detective, each of which open with several pages of testimony of other police talking about how great he is. These books are written in the third person. Just an ego the size of All Outdoors, but by most accounts, the books were ghost-written. They certainly don't hold up to too terribly much fact-checking, and he was in trouble as a police officer all the time, in an era when you had to be really, really bad to get in trouble as a cop. But he was also a Freemason and a member of the same lodge as Dr. Haldane Clemenson. So Wooldridge went in and heard his confession. He confessed, "I made up the thing about the burglar." Really, it was a suicide. She took the chloroform herself. She'd been talking about it for some time. Now, as they started digging in a little bit further, they started realizing that both he and his wife seemed to have other lovers on the side. He said, "Yes, after the children came, we both changed so much, we decided you go your way, I'll go mine." So that baby with which she was pregnant was not, in fact, mine. That may be why she took the chloroform. Now, further investigation showed that he had been providing abortions on the side. One theory is that she had broken into his equipment while he was out, trying to take the stuff to induce an abortion on her own. Now, one of the bigger clues is that he may or may not have actually been home at the time. One of his stories was, "Well, yes, I do have these other girlfriends, and they might have wanted to kill her so they could marry me." This ended up being a really big thing. They talked about two of Clemenson's affinities. This became front page news. Affinity was another term for girlfriend that they were really into using at the time. Now, they kept Dr. Clemenson in custody. Here's another picture of the house with the coffin being carried out of it. They did bring him along so he could see this, to see her funeral. But all the while, they were trying to track down a woman by the name of Anna Kolb, who was known as the girl with the dreamy eyes. Now, Anna Kolb was one of those affinities that they spoke of, that she spoke of. She called him Fluffy Ruffles in her various letters. But there were a few others. They just really liked using the word affinity in 1909. Like here you can see another article talking about another violinist and his affinity, another guy and his affinity. And there's even occasionally, this is one of the other affinities who later said she never wanted to hear the word affinity again after being roughed up at the police station. Right down below is this article, "Leave Families, Elope to Europe," talking about this young architect Frank Lloyd Wright and his affinity, Mrs. Cheney. So this trial went on for a really long time. They spent about half of their time in this sensational trial just bringing these various affinities up and just ripping on them, trying to impugn their character, trying to establish that these were not very admirable young women. Really, it made a whole mess of the trial. But eventually, Clemenson was found guilty. Here he is looking with his mother, who also kind of looks like an Edward Gorey character in a way. Now, he was found guilty and ordered to a life term in prison. There were a couple of attempts to get him a new trial just based on how badly the trial had been conducted, wasted so much time impugning the honor of the various affinities. At some point along the line, though, he was pardoned. I'm not entirely sure why. Now, the story that he had poisoned his wife pretty well held up, though the idea that she had accidentally poisoned herself while trying to induce an abortion and he had made up the story about the burglars to spare everybody's honor and keep himself out of trouble also feels fairly convincing sometimes. But it's a several hundred-page clemency file, so I haven't gone down to Springfield to see it yet. I would have to pay like $300 to get a copy of it. The copies cost so much. But after he got out of jail, he looked even more like an Edward Gorey character. He got involved in things like mail theft every now and then, but generally just went back to practicing medicine. The story of the year in 1909, which is completely out of public memory today. Certainly there's no plaque up outside of the house. Let's also talk about some architecture here. We've covered this before, but up on North Sheridan, recently donated to Loyola by the Pritzker family. This is the Emil Bach House by Frank Lloyd Wright, who left for Europe with his affinity. So I've always kind of liked this one because up in the front of it, there's a plaque that says that the design of it reflects Frank Lloyd Wright's belief in the importance of family life. For other people, not for himself. All right, I'm just going to lock someone out of that chat. Okay. Somebody over in Twitch is trying to troll everybody or put on ads. I just happened to catch it. So now take a look back behind the Emil Bach House up near Sheridan and Fargo. Back behind it, the building that you are seeing, the very large high-rise, 13 stories high, is known as the Farcroft. And I absolutely love this one, 1928. Let's go look at it a little closer. It's like the Seven Dwarfs theme. Only I don't think there are ever 7 of them altogether. Very much like a medieval castle, 13 stories high. Rumor has it that the architect was an amateur magician and included no right angles in the building to better direct the flow of mystical energy. Now, about 10 years back, there was a renovation which added right angles to it. But the grotesques outside symbolize various vices, including one called the Owner, which I guess having that be a vice makes sense when you're talking about apartments. These were all rentals, not a place that you would go to own. Now, the story about the architect being a magician, I don't really know where that comes from. The earliest source I could see was a blog post by a Shakespearean actor who lived there, and where he got his information, he wasn't saying. But Charles W. Nichol is a guy who designed about 1,200 buildings around the country, but still doesn't have that much data out there about him. The rest of his buildings don't have all of this mystical weirdness about it, at least none of them that I looked up. So, difficult to say, but it says a building with so much character. Now, because of some real estate listings recently, we can get some pictures of the inside, which have that whole medieval dining hall vibe. So let's zoom in on this a little if we can. Let's look at these figures by the fireplace. That again, kind of look like Edward Gorey characters. This place was going up at the time that Edward Gorey was born here in Chicago, so you would have seen it when it was brand new, when he was just a little kid living a couple of blocks away. Did he walk by and see these things and be inspired by them, or file them away in the back of his memory? We'll never know. He certainly didn't write it down if he did. But it's one of several strange buildings and houses around. One of the more famous is sometimes called the Peacock House, the Barbie House, or the Candyland House. This is an 1891 home that was built and painted like olive drab green or something at the time that Jackie and Don Sadin bought it back in the 1970s. And they picked a color palette for the place based on what Jackie remembered about going to the Edgewater Beach Hotel back when that was still standing. Pastel everything. And the pastel included all the way through the house as well. Now, this was became a neighborhood landmark fairly quickly. In the early 2020s, when Jackie needed to sell it, she ended up selling to a young couple named Joe Bergatino and Ricky Gonzalez, who began renovating it, but mostly keeping the character. I think they got a very good price on the place because they promised to keep the overall character of the place. Like they took a couple of colors out because they just didn't really fit the palette too well, but did a lot of updating, including changing the open concept bathroom that was up at the top in the real estate listing. This was an art studio / open concept bathroom. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. Ricky and Joe documented their renovation of this on their Instagram feed, which is called Homos with Hammers. But artsy houses are fairly common in Rogers Park. One of the more famous, which has been like this for over a decade now, at 1790 West Lunt is this house occupied by a guy named Mark Troitsky, who came to this state from the Soviet Union right before it collapsed. This was all made up. This whole art display of hubcaps was made up of things that he found on his walk to the grocery stores on Devon. He would walk through alleys to Devon, find it to buy groceries about once a week, and if he found anything neat, he'd just pick it up and carry it on home with him, and ended up making this entire display. It's been like that for well over a decade now. Just a few doors down is this house. When I saw this one, I felt like we should be able to ring a bell and get a cookie when you find a creepy old house like this. When you look up a creepy story and find a house that looks like this, with a new coat of paint needed, a graveyard of rusted automobiles in the background. Even while I was filming it for that first morning mini tour, some neighbors came by and said, filming the haunted house, are you? I don't think they seriously believe it to be haunted, but they say that one light comes on in it now and then, and it's always the same light, and it's only one light. They think somebody lives there, but nobody seems to be entirely sure. So this was originally the home of a guy by the name of John Henry Hewitt, who was known as the Miser of Rogers Park. This was a guy who always bragged that he worked 15 hours a day building his fortune by a fraction of a cent at a time, and had no patience whatsoever for these young kids nowadays who roll in at 9 o'clock in the morning, take an hour for lunch playing billiards, and start parting their hair at 4:45 so they can make sure to get out right at 5. He worked 15 hours a day and eventually did amass himself a fortune. He was worth something like $300,000 in turn of the 20th century money. Millions of dollars today. However, he only spent for himself and his family about $60 a year. Just about $1 a week. So eventually, after 50 years of marriage, his wife sought a divorce on the grounds that he was just so entirely stingy. Then, just a few weeks after she filed for divorce while out living with her daughter, she passed away, which ended up being a major case. She died in a hospital, but she passed out from pneumonia while eating a bowl of soup, and later when that bowl of soup was tested, they found enough strychnine to kill about 25 people. They also found some in some medicine that had gone to the house with her from the old place, and initially everybody assumed, well, he must have poisoned her. However, there was so much poison in that soup that if she had taken a bite of it, she never would have made it all the way to the hospital. Now, one story was that the poison had been added later. It almost had to have been added later, but then leaves the question of who added it. One story was that his daughter had added it after her mother's death to try to implicate her father, just to prove that he was insane so they could take control of his finances. This, I think, is entirely possible. But others believe that she was actually trying to kill her mother. Others believe that Hewitt himself had added the poison, hoping to kill her. And this is something that nobody seemed to be able to figure out. So eventually, here in the house, the coroner's jury decided to recommend that there be a further investigation. They believed that either John or his daughter had added the poison after the fact. But they didn't know who, they didn't know why. They recommended a bigger investigation. And State's Attorney Hoyne apparently looked at the case and said, nah, I ain't got time for this, just forget it. So the story just kind of faded away from the news. He came back into the news himself about 4 years later when he was caught stealing potatoes from a place up over the ridge. You know, potatoes cost money after a while. And 2 years after that, his relatives finally did manage to have him declared incompetent and have him lose control of the money. He died a few months later. He's at Rose Hill Cemetery, apparently unmarked, which does not surprise me one bit. I'm sure it's just the way that he would have wanted it. Now, incidentally, one of his daughters married a guy who remembered, like in the 1930s, was able to reminisce about going to see the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And he said he was more of a Douglas man, but he thought Lincoln was the finest man who ever lived, and also said that Lincoln and Douglas were the old story, the long and the short of it. Get it? Because one of them was tall and one of them was short? Hilarious. Awful lot of these stories are on Lunt Avenue. Just a couple of doors down, the Miser House is just over there, but this was the home of Stephen Purrington Lunt, namesake of the street itself. His brother Orrington is said to be the man who discovered Evanston, though of course he did no such thing. And Orrington's daughter Cordelia Lunt was said by Orson Welles to be the most interesting person he had ever met. This is a guy who met an awful lot of people. Mostly I think she just shared theatrical anecdotes with him. She just knew everybody in theater in the 19th century. But just up the road from there, the house that has really kept me occupied today. It's a good one for Juneteenth as well. This was the Pollard House, and was as such for several decades, really. It was the home of John W. and Amanda Pollard. Now, John was the first black family, the Pollards were the first black family to live in Rogers Park. They moved here around the turn of the 20th century. Now, John was a drummer boy by most accounts in the Civil War, but one thing I'm finding about this is there are a lot of articles about this family and their various accomplishments, but most of them are rehashing the same information from 10 years ago without really citing an earlier source. Really finding good data about this stuff is really difficult because the records don't always back up what you see on the internet. What we do see is we have it from one of his sons in an interview in the 1970s that John had been a barber in Missouri, had a 10-chair barber shop, but decided to move to Chicago because he wanted, around the Evanston area, because he wanted to be close to Northwestern University. Now, as for his military records are rather difficult as well. According to most accounts, he was known when he was in the Army, he was known as Jackson Ridgway, and only became John W. Pollard later on. He was a member of the 83rd United States Colored Troops, but pulling up their records, there is a John Pollard in that muster roll, in addition to Jackson Ridgway. And the John W. Pollard, it's hard to tell if that's the same guy or if the Ridgway thing is off. John W. Pollard, we know, escaped from slavery in Kansas City. There's some paperwork from his enslaver later on in the files, but it just seems very weird that there would be two John Pollards operating in the same one. Or if he was known as Jackson Ridgway and later took the name of a guy who he had served in the Army with, there's got to be a story there that just doesn't seem to quite survive. But he is perhaps best known in his time for being the father of Fritz Pollard, who was one of the first couple of black NFL players. After leading Lane Tech to various victories and Brown University after that, he was one of the most celebrated athletes of the early 1920s. He was all over the newspapers for this. Some of his brothers had been football stars as well, but he went on to be a professional and was the first black head coach in the NFL. But all of the black players that they had were informally removed in 1926, forming an informal color barrier that lasted another 20 years after that until 1946. Fritz got involved in other various things after that, but remained a famous athlete. One particularly interesting guy is his brother Hughes Pollard. Now, Hughes Pollard, most newspaper articles today, or various magazine and web posts about the family, say that Fritz was a jazz drummer who served in World War I, was attacked with mustard gas, and later died from the effects when he died in 1926. This is one of the things where the records just aren't backing this up. We do know that he was a drummer. There are various contemporary accounts that he dropped out of high school to go drum in the band at Riverview Amusement Park, where he also worked in the dunk tank. Thereafter, he got a job with a traveling minstrel show that toured in Australia. By some accounts, the last minstrel show to tour in Australia. By the 1920s, when his mother and sister came to visit him, he had been working in amusement resorts and hotels around London and Paris. He had been for quite some time, including all throughout World War I. I've very rarely seen anybody that I researched with so many passport applications. And the passport applications show that he was living in England, New Zealand, and Paris throughout the time of World War I. There is a record in his files that after he registered for the draft, some people from the War Department came to the house right here on Lunt Avenue, where his mother said, "Oh, I haven't heard from Fritz in a few months. He's living over in London." And the note says they're not really sure that she's telling the truth. They suspect he might be dodging the draft, but just have to refer it out elsewhere. But in fact, he was serving with in the theatrical profession over in the UK. As far as I can tell from the records, he did not actually serve in World War I, but eventually came back and died in Chicago in 1926. There's also his sister Naomi. Naomi was the first black woman to graduate from Northwestern University, undoubtedly what her father wanted. She got an English degree, and according to one of her other brothers, later worked with Oscar Micheaux, the filmmaker, on the script for Within Our Gates, which was really the first really significant black motion picture. But not the first black movie by any means. Some of the first of those were made by the brother who killed the story, Luther J. Pollard. Luther J. Pollard started Ebony Films, which was the first company that specialized in black movies. He's actually shown clips of them. There was a documentary in the 1970s which kind of downplays how controversial they were. They claim that they were very, very popular, Ebony Films. Really, if you look at stuff from 1915, 1916, they were very controversial among the black community because they were mostly slapstick. They were mostly humor. And some people objected to seeing black people acting like buffoons, like pretty much everybody does in slapstick. There's actually some video clip of him from the 1970s when he was about 99 years old.
I had watched comedies, and I saw that pantomime was the thing that made comedies entertaining, and I could see no reason why they could not excel as screen comedians. And I finally decided to produce pictures with American Negro actors. We were the first company that specialized in that.
A parade.
Oh, fantastic. Just fantastic to be able to see that. He was, after Ebony Films folded, he was working in freelance advertising, but also sold a home movie projector. One of the first people to get involved in what we would now, I guess, call home video. Now, in his 90s, he was still living here in this house on Lunt and was working in an office up on Clark. In 1974, a Sun-Times reporter came to talk to him and found him suitably cranky. And they asked him what the biggest change in Rogers Park was, and he said, "In the old days, we didn't have all these people of European backgrounds." And when asked if that was a positive change, he gave a thumbs down twice. But as I mentioned, a lot of these stories are on Lunt Avenue. If we go back a little bit further east, backtracking past the Miser House and the Lunt House, we get to yet another murder house. This one we've covered before. I've now found a contemporary picture of this one, so we know that it's the correct house. Sometimes when things have been renumbered, it gets a little bit tricky. But this was the home of Dr. Oliver Hart, who moved here in 1905 along with his wife, who was about 15 years old at the time. After they moved in here, they also adopted another young woman into the family, another teenager who had been living with her sisters at the Industrial School for Girls. Now, she had two younger sisters who did not move in with her, but one of them, Irene, came to visit one day. Well, all of them came to visit. Mrs. Hart took the other two girls out shopping. Irene decided to stay behind. And at some point in the afternoon, Oliver Hart put in a frantic call to a neighbor saying that Irene had eaten some morphine, and now she was dying. So they rushed to try to save her. They found Dr. Hart completely hysterical, just a young doctor, and of course initially assumed that he must have murdered her. The idea was that this guy was a pervert. After all, he was married to a 15-year-old girl. There was one story that he used to host parties for young girls at his old house back when he was younger, and that they had found pictures of young girls all over the apartment. Hard to know if this kind of stuff is actually true, though, because once again, we're dealing with the Chicago police of 1905 and 1906. You can't necessarily believe a word they say. His story was that he was a morphine addict, and that Irene had eaten some of the morphine, probably thinking that it was candy. I just have a tendency to want to side with the people who were accused of murder in those days, just as we're talking about the Chicago police of 1905. In any case, he ended up deciding to plead guilty because he was given to believe that if he pleaded guilty, he would be spared the noose, and it was a given that he was going to be hanged, partly because he had confessed after breaking down under questioning, which means probably being tortured. And in any case, he went to jail and was eventually released. He trained as a florist and worked in flowers after his release. But not all of the murderers here in Rogers Park in the old days were people who looked like Edward Gorey characters. We had a couple of our regular old gangsters as well. In fact, one thing you hear all over the city is Al Capone was here, Al Capone was there. It's almost never actually true, which is why I was absolutely stunned a couple of years ago to stumble upon data putting Al Capone up here at the corner of Farwell and Sheridan, right here in Rogers Park, way on the opposite end of the town of most of his stuff. But when Al applied for a gun permit, this is the address that he gave in the early 1920s. Furthermore, his brother, with whom he apparently lived in this place, mentioned this address in a testimony before Congress in the 1950s. So there's actually reasonably good documentation. We don't know how much time Al spent here, but Al Capone really did give this his address and really did probably live here, at least briefly, after first moving to Chicago. There is now a pizza place there. As far as I know, they have not really played up their Capone connection as much as many places that don't actually have one have. I kind of respect them for that. I'm kind of surprised, but I got to respect them. There's also a guy named Cabaret Jim who had a tavern somewhere down this block. Might be the same building that is now Lost Eras Antiques, which is a strange story in and of itself. Everything about that place is weird and cursed and wonderful. But James Cabaret Jim Probasco was in and out of mob-related stories throughout the 1920s and 30s. Then in 1934, after the FBI caught John Dillinger and shot him in an alley by the Biograph Theater, a lot of people looked at the body and said, that doesn't look quite like the guy on the wanted posters. That was because Dillinger had undergone some plastic surgery at the home of James Probasco. Now, when they arrested him, roughing him up a little bit in the process, they found some pictures. They found that he had been operating this tavern over on 1525 Howard, right about where this is now. It's difficult to tell from the picture whether this might be the same building. And also some pictures indicating that he had previously worked as a horse barber. Now, horse barber, I am given to understand, is not a thing. If you need somebody to groom your horse, you actually get a groom. Horse barber appears almost nowhere else in the newspaper record. It's something strictly done by Cabaret Jim Probasco. But that's kind of par for the course when we come to stories of this guy. So this was the guy who owned the house that became the makeshift plastic surgery place for John Dillinger. And there are strange things before and after, too. The tavern had been previously owned by another guy, but 2 months before Dillinger was caught, he was killed in a hit and run. And after James Probasco was brought in for questioning, they took him to the Bankers Building, the FBI headquarters at Clark and Adams, and he jumped out the window falling to his death, which many people believed was not really an accident. It would have been, well, the FBI fairly reasonably said, listen, lots of people can see that window. If we'd just been dangling him out there by his foot and dropped him, we never would have gotten away with that. So then his funeral was given at a place on Dearborn that, as far as I could tell, never hosted another funeral and did not have a funeral home in it. And, of course, this all just ties into all the other strangeness about Dillinger's death, such as the fact that they stole his brain. As in this article by Kay Hall, a woman who wrote for the Chicago Daily Times and lived up here in Rogers Park as well. She lived on the 7200 block of Sheridan. Now, about a generation after that, on the 7600 block, is this old folks' home. Now, that a horse barber is not a thing, I have been told by a pretty serious horse girl. You do not want to contradict a horse girl when it comes to horses. Especially if you're like me and don't know a mare from a gelding. Well, this is an old folks' home, which was the final home of Yellow Kid Wiles, Chicago's greatest con artist and swindler, at least by his own admission. His autobiography, as we've seen in various other tours, was pretty much the inspiration for the movie The Sting. Practically everything that goes on in The Sting, including the big con at the end, is enumerated in Yellow Kid's own autobiography. Now, his ghostwriter, in fact, wanted to sue the producers of the movie, but in the 1970s, Yellow Kid was too old for that. He was about 101 years old. Story went that he had swindled people out of about $8 million over the years, but by then was just living poor and in a nursing home. There's a picture of him at the time. At the time of his death, he had just enough money that the city wouldn't pay for a burial. He had a plot at Rose Hill Cemetery, where I believe his wife and family are. But Rose Hill wouldn't take the burial because nobody was there to pay for it. Eventually, he was buried down at Archer Woods Cemetery. But while we're this far up, just actually a little bit above Howard Avenue. Usually Howard is the dividing line between Chicago and Evanston, but that short section above Howard but below Calvary Cemetery is the one part of Evanston that Chicago actually managed to absorb. One of Yellow Kid's neighbors, again, a generation after his time had ended there, lived right up here, right at about the very edge of the city. This apartment, this little place, was the final home of the mysterious photographer Vivian Maier. Now, Vivian Maier came to Chicago in the mid-20th century, worked as a nanny for various groups. She would usually live in the suburbs and take the kids she was nannying downtown, walking around with this Rolleiflex camera, taking pictures of people on the street. Now, people who went around with her definitely knew that she was a photographer. She was constantly taking pictures. In the end, there was something like 300,000 pictures or something like that known. But late in life, she was just living up here in Rogers Park, where a couple of her former charges were paying for an apartment for her, along with all of her pack rat stuff. She had boxes piled to the ceiling. Some of the places she lived, the floor would start to cave in from all of the boxes she kept. But her photographs ended up in a storage locker. And when she couldn't make the payments, those storage for those photographs went up for auction. So about 10 or 15 years back, several negatives were bought for about $400. And when they were developed, it was several absolute masterpieces of mid-century street photography. Examples like this. And I used to look at these and wonder, how did she ask for permission for these? How did she not get beaten up? And some of the kids she used to nanny, now grown up and reminiscing, say pretty much the same thing. Like, they don't have any idea how she didn't get beaten up. Usually she didn't ask permission. She just walked up to somebody and took their picture. Some of them, of course, were in no condition to it, too. Now, she herself was a bit of a mystery. Some of the people she nannied described her as like a real-life Mary Poppins. Others described her as borderline abusive. She spoke in what has been described as a fake French accent. Claimed to have been born in France, but was in fact born in New York. Usually gave fake names. Like at antique stores, when they asked her to hold something, they'd ask your name, and she'd give them a death glare. Towards the end of her life, she was living up here in Rogers Park, and neighbors just thought of her as a local bag lady, and most of them didn't even realize that she had an apartment. They thought that she was probably unhoused. Among her pictures, though, are some really interesting slices of Chicago history, besides just great art. I know from some of her kids remembered that they used to go take pictures at Graceland Cemetery. I don't know if those have been developed yet. But among the pictures that have been developed and shared is a shot of the Chicken Man. I love this guy. This was a guy who would be seen all over the city with a chicken on his head. The chicken would perform while he played the accordion. It would walk a tightrope. It would dance. It would. One guy said he would do everything but talk. Featured in a lot of books by Daniel Pinkwater, one of my favorite authors. So, in her later years, Vivian would regularly walk out of this place, down the alley, and over to the Rogers Park beach, where she would sit on a bench for hours, reading books and magazines that she had taken out of the dumpster. So we've got some film footage here that recreates her walk. Pause of this fantastic mural there. We'll pause again at some artwork that reminds me of some other outsider art, Daniel Johnston stuff. Right up here at the lake, this is Vivian's view at Vivian's bench. This is the bench where she would sit. And even when they were making a documentary about her about 10 years ago, they would just come up here and like, do you remember this woman who used to hang out here? And they'd say, oh, is it the French lady? but nobody had any idea she was a world-class photographer. Now, she died soon after these photographs were discovered, before she could be contacted. And on the one hand, it's a tragedy, and on the other, it's probably exactly the way that she wanted it to play out. She was so private. She would have hated people looking into her personal life while she was alive. There is some evidence that she tried to have the photographs displayed, but it wasn't something that she pursued seriously, certainly not as much as taking them. But this, again, is the view that Vivian would have while she sat there for hours and hours on the beach in Rogers Park. So that, everybody, is, shall we say, Volume 1 of Strange Tales of Rogers Park. In a neighborhood known for its eccentrics, we have quite a few. There's a lot of them that didn't make the cut. I've even gone over time a little bit today. So everybody, thank you very much for joining me. From here, we will, I don't have anything else to plug right now. It's been so hectic and crazy around here. I haven't had a chance to book too much. Once again, Find a Grave Friday will probably not be seen tomorrow, as I will be on the road. Saturday, again, probably on the road, but we'll see. So here's Benny Goodman. We'll just hang out like we always do. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Phoenix. Thanks, Marie and Kathy. And thank you, Paula. I don't think Lost Eras, the antique store itself, is cursed. It's just a lot of the things they sell and a lot of things they have in their window are cursed. I'd love to just show like some current stuff too, but this is a history tour. I'd love to like talk about Le Piano, the Rogers Park Social Club. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Carolyn. Thank you, Judy. Diana, that's my favorite thing, is finding the stories that people don't even know if they're living there. Nice, Georgia. Good night, and be yourself, Bob. I mean, be yourself, Wolfgang. Thank you, Marita. Thanks, everybody. So yeah, here it is. The brand new mysterious Chicago headquarters. Behind me you can see the swinging chair that scares the crap out of Miles. The green chair you'll recognize from the old one. A bit of the Tiffany lamp that you'll recognize from the old one. I'm dressed for the weather. I normally would button up the top button a bit more, but this is a Hawaiian shirt, doesn't have it. Now, I'll tell you, I've done quite a few of these Chicago neighborhood ones. We've got the Gold Coast, we've got Hyde Park, we've got Bronzeville, we've got Lakeview, River North. Quite a few of these. And Chris, yeah, Miles was here earlier. I don't know where he's gone now. Now, Miles started out all curled up right next to me up here on the shelf. Sydney, nope, not real brick. It's like foam.
Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks those of you sending in donations. Need those help. Clarkston Union, thanks. I'm glad you all like the shirt. I needed some stuff I could wear in the summer, you know. For various occasions. Yeah, Kathleen, it's padded walls. Those two are the only ones that are actually brick. There's also, the rest of them are painted in darker tones. Bedroom is purple. Happy 92nd birthday to MSI. Shame what happened to that place. The way they're treating school groups these days just does not bear speaking about. Ever since Mr. Griffin took over. Clarkston Union Mac and Cheese. Got it. Shows off the arms, Chris. I get it. Be the neon sign. You can get custom neon signs pretty easily these days. It's not real neon, it's LED.
Tell you all about it. Fuck it.
Thank you, Kirk. Thanks for coming out. I've got a different on-air sign coming. This one it doesn't work quite the way I want it to. Thanks for those of you sending housewarming gifts tonight. A lot of people did last week, so I kind of turned last week into the housewarming because so many people were sending housewarming gifts. But here it is. Still in progress. I am still figuring out exactly how to rig up the combination liquor cabinet / coffee counter. Working out, figuring out the office / dining room. Not to mention things like the kitchen. Good night, Dad. All over town.
You see them shuffling, shuffling, trucking along. It spread like a forest blaze, became a craze and sang to Harlem now. Everybody's trucking.
I'm still getting a lot of comments on that video about Lady Savage Butts, the gravestone in Nashville. Comments every day on that thing. I'm amazed how many people feel like it's relevant to point out that she was a Scorpio. Hey, Luann, sorry about the lack of notification. There's nothing I can do about it. Am I still going to add ghosts to replace the bats? Maybe. There's not really as much of a logical place to put them here. Nah, Octavio, I don't want one of those scoreboards too much. If I'm making a lot, I feel like I'm bragging. If I'm making too little, I feel like I'm shaming you all.
Goodman presents On the Alamo.
And a lot of times these days, the virtual tours don't bring in that much these days. Now that there's more competition, you know. Sarah, I'm not sure if there's a woman named Lady Mild Fanny, but Fanny Mild, maybe. Yeah, I have heard there are some strange stories about Archer Wood Cemetery. I've never found anything unusual there myself. Yellow Kid is out there. Kathy Miles seems to have adjusted fairly well. All things considered. Not so much so that I'm not considering getting a kitten or anything. But it's also, this place is a little bit smaller. 2 cats might be a lot for this, but I also feel like you might want somebody else. I'll always be the Chicago tour guide kingpin. Why, thanks. There was some guy I didn't recognize doing a tour at Graceland a couple of weeks ago. As I was leaving, he like looked at my car like, hey, if you take my tour, you might learn something. I don't know, guys. I think of other tour guides as colleagues, not competition, but I don't know. Miles seems like a pretty cool, chill dude on here. Get him howling about 3 o'clock in the morning and see how chill he is. But I feel like he does need somebody to chase. Octavia, I don't think that's the guy with the comic books. That guy's alright. I don't know, he was just trying to be friendly, I'm sure. I don't know, this like salesman attitude. I was kind of sick that day anyway, so.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and we stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Mac and cheese does sound good. I had like this lemon basil tortellini with chicken and Brussels sprouts. I got the Wonder Oven. This thing that was all over the ads in the Tube in London. It's basically a toaster oven, but it's cute. Thank you, Belle. I've been enjoying that chair quite a bit. Miles has hopped up on it a couple times. He does not like it. But he likes to get in my lap when I'm sitting in it. See if I can lure him out here. Hang on. Miles! Come here, Miles. Where are you? I could have totally fallen asleep just then, so I will get back up. Get tired of the braid here. We can try it like this side. And you see too much into the purple room. No. Still trying to figure out what the best angle to show this place is. I think it's this one. Evening, Mark. We are in the post-show hang right now, just kind of wrapping up for the night.
Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
8 a.m. Central. But of course, this video will live on. You can find that on the youtube.com/Adam Selzer. Though it may have the wrong title. But all right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me. I will probably not be on tomorrow because I'll be on the road. But we'll be back soon. We'll have another tour next week, I believe. But thanks a lot, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tour. Still in the process of setting this up after a very tumultuous sort of month. But thanks, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago, saying stay safe, stay strong, and stay